Welcome to Bloomberg Law. I'm Pacchia. I recently sat down with New York Law School Dean Richard Matasar. Here's part 2 of our conversation. You've been singled out and called one of the most dogged and scolding critics of the legal academy. Is that a fair characterization in your view?
Scolding, I would say no. Dogged, I would say yes. I've seen the development of a higher education system in the United States over the last 30 years of my career as one that's become increasingly difficult for the average citizen to afford. That's a problem for our country. It's a problem for our competitiveness across the international markets in which we compete. We have to find a solution to the problem of the aggregate cost of education. It can't be solved by law schools alone. It has to be solved across university education for undergraduates and then the graduate add-ons that almost every student needs to take these days in order to effectively find a career. And I've been aggressive in pointing out that we have a problem. We have a problem in funding. We have a problem in the deliverable. And we as educators have to be responsible for doing what we can to solve the problems. So there's two things: the quality of what we deliver and the price at which we deliver it. I figure the most important of the things that we can contribute to at the school level is the quality of what we deliver. And at least in our institution and places I've been associated with over the years, we start first with making the quality the best we can for the price that we charge. If we're going to deal with the price of the product to the student, that's going to have to take place with the help of regulators, with the government, with a society that decides it wants to invest in higher education.
How does this do that? Just make financing more available?
It has. One of the great innovations of the last couple of years have been programs largely funded by the federal government to help students with debt repayment, either by spreading the payments over a longer period of time, forgiving debt if they go into appropriate public service work, or creating some income-based systems of repaying the loan. That's a decision to subsidize higher education and to invest in the competitiveness of the country through higher education. It's expensive. In these days of trying to have budget relief and seeing us trying to deal with a debt ceiling and seeing the country struggling with its overwhelming debt, I can't imagine that the federal government will continue to be in the business of subsidizing higher education. If we get to that point, then our regulators, those that look at higher education, are going to have to empower the schools to find more creative ways of reaching their students. To me, that means greater use of technology. It means greater use of fewer faculty members, but those faculty members doing more for their students. It means increasing our teaching. It means a lot of things that can't take place without some significant change in our business.
I think historically people have been able to justify the high cost of law school and almost offset it with the promise of high salaries going forward. Much has been made in this story about median salaries for recent graduates from these institutions. Talk to me about median salaries. How are they calculated? How do you figure out what students are making when they come out of the school, and how is it ultimately relayed to publications like U.S. News World Report?
Well, the median salary is a make-believe number. No one actually makes the median salary. Why? Because math works this way. The middle number is the median salary. Well, let's say you have 100 people making $1 million a year and 100 people making $100,000 a year. What's the median between that? I mean, there's no connection between the number that's in the middle, which would be 500,000, and, or I guess it's not math, a little bit higher than that. There's no relationship between that number and the salaries that people are actually making. Half the students are making a significantly higher salary. Half the students are making a significantly lower salary. That's really the distribution of salaries in law right now.
But for New York Law School, the median salary is $160,000. Are you suggesting that there are many students from that graduating class that made way more than $160,000 in their first year?
No, that's actually a funny set of statistics. We don't report the median. New York Law School doesn't report it because it's not a valuable number. The median for us ends up being the middle number of all the salaries that are reported. For us, we ended up with only students making a lot of money wanting to report their salaries. Well, if that's the only numbers you've got, they're going to end up being higher.
So it could be a 55-year-old partner who graduated from New York Law School in 1985, and they're making...
It's with each graduating class. But, if a handful of students report their salaries, you're going to report the salaries that you have, and the middle number is going to be high. It's as if you had one salary reported. That would be your median. It would also be the bottom salary and also be the top salary. What we try to do instead for our students is to provide them accurate information that reflects the distribution of jobs that students have upon graduation. So a significantly higher percentage of our students go to work at small, medium-sized law firms, government agencies, and places where the salaries are significantly lower than the median salary that we are asked to report by U.S. News and World Report. And so what we try to do to our students is say, don't pay attention to that median number, which we don't give you, but we have to report for purposes of what a magazine is doing for its rankings. And take a look instead at the distribution of where the jobs are, because we're going to give you two pieces of information. How many students work in each of these different job settings, and what we understand the salaries to be for those job settings. So some students do report their salaries when they're in lower paid jobs. So we could say, for example, someone at a small firm will make something on the order of $35,000 to $75,000 a year in salary. And we can tell that to our students and say, if you're going to get a job, more likely than not, in one of those organizations, expect to make a salary within that range. On the other hand, if you're going to work for a 500 or 600 person law firm, your salary is likely to be $160,000 a year. And that's what we end up trying to tell our students, as opposed to saying, pay attention to some number that we don't give you, that we're asked to report for some other purpose, for someone that understands the information they're providing is inaccurate.
Let's take a look at the law school system in total. Do we need more law schools, in your opinion?
We need the right kind of law schools. And so you could ask the question of why there are more law schools that are being sought. And there are a number of different places. The state of New York has actually talked about creating more law schools. So what I would say is we don't need more law schools trying to do exactly the same thing as the law schools that currently serve the market are doing. You need law schools that are coming at the question of law independent of each other, with a different way of thinking about what it means to be a lawyer. A public interest-oriented law school would be an interesting new kind of institution. A law school that was formed on the idea of working in the intellectual property field might be an interesting kind of law school. Another general, all-purpose, do the same thing that's being done by the guys down the street law school doesn't seem to me to be necessary. We have ample capacity in the current schools to meet the market demands.
Right. But I think a lot of people are going to look at that statement and say, but that is going to add more recent law school graduates into a marketplace that already doesn't have a place to put them. How do you reconcile those two realities? I think that in essence, that's what the New York Times article was about. What did the New York Times get wrong there?
I guess they got wrong the idea that there's no independent judgment that is exercised by someone who decides to take education. So there are sometimes a Duane Reade and a Walgreens and a Rite Aid sitting within one block on the same city block. Do we need to have 3 drugstores on that same block? Well, there's customer preference and there's a desire to have a market served, and people compete. You have a McDonald's next door to a Burger King, next door to a Subway on the same block. Law school has some of the same characteristics. There are demands on the market for a product that's being offered. The same article in the New York Times neglects to tell us that there are 30 or 40,000 people a year that don't go to law school that want to go to law school. And they're not being served right now. So you could say, until all market demand is exhausted, there's a desirable product that's being withheld from a consumer. If everyone was served, maybe the price would be dampened. So I look at this as, again, 2 separate decisions. The decision to go to law school made by somebody who decides that that education is valuable, and then a marketplace that absorbs them with their skills. Now, you're a lawyer, but you're not practicing law.
That's true.
And it seems to me that you've understood that the education you received is one that has value that sometimes greatly exceeds the narrow purposes for which you took that education. And that has been true historically about being a lawyer. It's been true historically about the training that a lawyer receives. CEOs of companies, lawyers. People that run philanthropies, lawyers. Governmental officials, lawyers. And I would suggest that has something to do with the education they've received, not with the fact that they have some unique idiosyncratic desire to do something that had nothing to do with their education. It's a very broad-based education. It creates analytical minds, people who can think clearly and can analyze clearly, and that's a valuable piece of education that people are willing and desirous of having.
You recently announced that you will be leaving New York Law School soon. What will you be doing next?
I can't announce where I'm going yet because my new employer hasn't yet made that a public announcement. But I'm going to be participating in higher education more generally, outside of the field of law. For the last decade or so, I've been more interested in thinking about what it means to be 16, 17, and 18 years old in the country, and how you find your way from being 16, 17, or 18 into being a responsible, effective adult. And the place I'm going to occupy next is going to allow me to work with younger students and also help them to find their way to graduate education.
Not an easy transition, to say the least. Dean Matasar, thanks so much for coming by today.
Thanks. It's really a pleasure.
We also want to point out that we invited the author of the New York Times Law School article, David Segal, to be a guest, but we have not yet heard back from him. For more on this issue, check out Bloomberg Law's Law School Report and Law Firm Management Law Report. Both are available on BloombergLaw.com and also on the Bloomberg Terminal. I'm Pacchia. Thanks for watching.